Good, so you can hear me. Excellent. So yes, thank you very much for coming along to my talk today. I'm going to be talking about my time in the Ministry of Justice. But as any good talk needs to start, there's the obligatory stuff about me. At university, my path to product management was quite a strange one. I studied classics, so Latin and ancient Greek, which is not the most obvious way to get into product management or indeed technology. But when I was at university, I was actually learning to fly with the RAF because I had dreams of learning to fly these things. But in actual fact, what I was really flying was this, which was a bit slightly different. But I wasn't very good at it. So I had to get a job. Okay? And then that meant I was working for about 12 years in a variety of different software companies, starting out with a startup called Zeus Technology, but then working in much larger organizations like Experian and Iron Mountain. And over the course of those 12 years, I learned a few things. And I kind of felt that I was only doing product management in one way. I was learning only how to do it in one particular way. So I thought, wouldn't it be good if I could learn how to do product management in lots of different ways, with lots of different companies of lots of different sizes, in many different markets? So I started up Product People, which was the company we mentioned earlier. And this gave me the opportunity to work with all these different types of companies. So in the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity to learn a great deal more. I've worked with companies like the Nike Foundation to build a charitable mapping application for people in Rwanda. I've worked with the BBC, done training with them. And I've worked with other organizations such as the Ministry of Justice, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So the Ministry of Justice, this essentially is a UK government organization that deals with the things you'd expect, so prisons, courts, but it also has this strange thing called Ministry of Justice Digital, MOJ Digital. And this was essentially a startup that they were building within the Ministry of Justice. So what this meant was, as an organization, we decided there was a better way of doing things. And probably the best way to do that is to play you a short video so that it'll explain in their own words what we did.
Our mission here is to build end-to-end digital services that meet the needs of users and save the public money. We put the user at the heart of everything we do here, and that drives a lot of innovation in the way that we think about how our services should be designed and delivered.
Users can, or the citizens can, self-diagnose whether they may be eligible for CLA.
We take what we call an agile approach to product development here, so users are actually involved in the design, the testing and development of the products. Much of the work we do is about challenging existing ways of doing things.
It's very easy to assume that you know something, and often we do have a good idea of something, but we don't actually know until we know. And knowing means testing, knowing means bringing stakeholders onto your side, knowing means being able to express what you need to have done and why you're doing it.
Collaboration is at the heart of what we do at Digital, and we'll always be looking for ways to work with more people across the organisation.
Okay, so the Ministry of Justice Digital. We were a startup within the Ministry of Justice. And what that meant was that we were going to deliberately take a different way to building things. Our aim, our mission, if you like, was to build digital services so good that people would prefer to use them. And this was a fundamentally different way of working in government. We were an organization of 150 people, agile, digital, customer-centric minded people, working to put the needs of the users first. And for us, our users were the 65 million citizens in the UK. And so essentially, all of these people, at some point in their lives, would have some reason to interact with the justice system. They might, for instance, need to make a small claim to get some money back from someone and would have to go to court to do that. Or perhaps, they might have a speeding fine and they might need to pay that. Or perhaps they may have friends or relatives who, for whatever reason, end up in prison and they might get involved in that particular way. But essentially, what we had here was an organization of about 70,000 people, the Ministry of Justice, and we were a very small part within that. We were 150 people of these digital-minded people. And so what we were trying to do was to say, every single time a person interacts with the justice system, we want to make that experience as good as it possibly can be. Because the reason being was that these people were only ever having to interact with the justice system when something bad had happened. You don't want to get a parking fine. You don't want to get caught by a traffic camera. You don't want to have to go to court if you don't need to. And so essentially, all these moments where people need to interact with the justice system were stressful and painful and generally not very much fun. And so our objective was not so much to try and make these experiences fun or pleasurable in that respect, but at least to make them as frictionless as possible, to make them as simple and straightforward as possible, to not make the existing situation any worse, to not make people feel any worse than they already did when they're in that situation. So the reason why I'm here to talk to you today is not to kind of convert you and say that this is, a fantastic way of working, but to actually give you some practical lessons that you can apply in your own organizations. So really, I'm here to tell you how you can take what I've learned over my 8 or so months at the Ministry of Justice as head of product and turn that into things that your organization can actually start doing tomorrow. So we've got 5 ways to start with, but there are many other ways. I'll just focus on these ones for the purpose of this talk. The first and foremost piece is to put the needs of your users first, and I'll expand upon these points in a minute so we can talk in a bit more detail. The second one is about building an empowered team. Coleman mentioned how it's important to build an empowered team, as did Martin and Tim earlier on in the keynote. We need to think about transforming the organization from the top down. We're looking beyond just the pure product management piece, and we're actually saying, how can we change our organization to give us the environment we need to do product management the right way? We're going to build a culture of showing and telling, show, don't tell. This idea that demonstrating what we've done is more important than talking about what we're going to do. And also, again, something that will be probably touched upon repeatedly throughout the day if we're talking about agile, lean, continuous improvement, continuous deployment. We're going to be talking about this kind of thing as well, how we actually improve continuously and what we did to make sure we did that. So first of all, putting user needs first. So the old way, we saw something very similar to this a moment ago, but essentially the old way, how many people recognize this in their own organizations, where you would be capturing requirements up front, building a big laundry list of things that you wanted to build into the product. And then we spend time and money, and if you're a government organization, that means going out to tender to ask various large organizations like the Accentures and the Logicas and the Capitas of this world to be able to bid to build that product from that list of requirements. And then the build happens, and maybe it takes 6 months, maybe it takes 12 months. If it's government, it'll probably take a lot longer. Thank you. And then at the very end of the process, so when this big IT project has gone through the process and has kind of come out the end, 18 months late, 200 million over budget, we then actually put it in front of the users. And funnily enough, they're not very happy about it, because the product's been designed by people who have no understanding of the needs of the users, and as a result, the resulting product doesn't meet the needs of the users. So of course they're unhappy. There's a better and a different way of doing this. Okay? So the way we talk about it is about this process of starting with user needs. We talk about discovery, where we go out there, and before we go anywhere near trying to build anything, we go out and understand what we know about the people who are trying to help with this particular product or service. We understand what their needs are, what their problems are, where they feel stressed, what they find difficult to understand, and we discover all of these things that on day one we don't know yet. And so what that does is it allows us to say, okay, we now know a few things, but we still don't know everything. So let's maybe try out a few ideas, and then we move into the alpha stage, and that's where we start experimenting. That's where we start drawing up some sketches. We start maybe doing some working prototypes. But all the time, we're putting them back in front of users to make sure that we're on the right track. Because we don't know anything. We're not the users. Okay? So we need to make sure we're always continually checking back with the people that we're building the service for. Because what that allows us to do is to make sure that we're not going to make a big mistake. And if we do find ourselves moving off track, we can course correct. We can move ourselves back onto track. Then, by the end of alpha, we really know two things. We know what the problem is reasonably well, and we've got a pretty good idea of what's going to work to solve that problem. Then, what we do is we almost throw away all of the prototypes, all of the mock-ups that we've done up until this point, and then we start building it properly. We're going to build it scalably. We're going to build it to work for 64 million, 65 million people in the UK. We're going to build it to make sure it's secure. But we're going to build it using the right technologies in the right way, because only now do we really understand enough to be able to do that properly. And then when we send it live, we're putting it in front of everyone. We're making sure that we're still gathering that feedback, and we're now into that process of continual improvement. Okay? So these 4 phases, we try to move through in about 6 to 9 months. So we take an idea about perhaps maybe improving some aspect of the courts process, all the way through to something that people are actually using in real life in 6 to 9 months. Now, how many of you could say in your organizations you can do that right now? Okay, hooray, Martin. So the point being is, if government can do this in the UK, any of your organizations can. It is possible, okay? But it does require a different way of working. So let's take an example. Booking a prison visit. So previously, if you're in prison, unfortunately, and you wanted someone to come and visit you, you'd have to fill out a form like this. This is actually the visiting order for a chap called Ronnie Biggs, who was a very famous train robber in the UK. He stole about, several million pounds back in the 60s. And as a result, what would happen with this form is this would be sent to the people you want to come and visit you. They'd have to phone up several times to try and book a visit time that was hopefully convenient for them and for the prison. And this whole process would take several rounds and involve lots of people and be very bureaucratic and take, a whole bunch of time and effort for everyone involved. But really, as a visitor, all they want to do is to book a visit. They don't want to have to phone up several times or fill in forms and make sure they have the right piece of paper with them that's been stamped by the right people. So actually, by focusing in on the underlying user need, as a visitor, I want to book a visit. As a prisoner, I want my friends and family to be able to visit me. Or as a prison staff member, I wish not to have to deal with logbooks on papers and so on to coordinate these visits. That should all be handled for me. So, the second point, building an empowered team. So what does this mean? First of all, it means hiring brilliant people. So to begin with, in the Ministry of Justice, we started out wanting to make some rapid changes. We wanted to make sure that we were actually able to hit the ground running. So what this meant was we hired people who were able to start without any training. So we hired very senior experienced people to come in on a short-term basis to get the ball rolling, to get things moving. And essentially, this gave us the ability to avoid those problems that sometimes happen when you're introducing agile or a different way of working into an organization that's primarily waterfall or project management or big IT. And the problem was that we were trying to avoid was that we didn't want people to think that agile or the way of working was failing because we didn't have people who were really good at doing it. So what we made sure was we brought the best people we could in to begin with. They could really show how the process could work very well, which meant there was no problem or no criticism of the process not being the thing that was working. Okay? So we made sure we hired the best people from the very outset. The second thing we did was to make sure we assembled the right team of people. And so what that meant was making sure we had the right skills to do the right job. So in our case, that meant having dedicated, experienced product managers, absolutely, designers, researchers, content designers, so specifically people with a background in journalism that would allow them to make sure that the copy, the writing in the products and services we're building was as easy to understand as possible. We made sure we had data scientists, we made sure we had specialists in other areas, web ops, continuous integration, all of these different things that we needed to make sure that we had the right skills to build the products and services we needed to. Something that Coleman was talking about earlier on, autonomy, mastery and purpose. Autonomy is something that individuals need to be allowed to do the job that they're doing. We set them the goal, we set them the mission, we allow them to do it in the best way possible. Again, in organisations such as the UK government and the Ministry of Justice, they were very much in that kind of command and control way of thinking. They would issue detailed orders and make sure that people would do things in a very prescriptive, specific way. Here, it was very much about saying, these people know what they're doing. Let them get on with it. So we gave them the autonomy to do things their own way. We let them work in their own way. So if they wanted to be doing Scrum, great, you can do Scrum. If you want to do Kanban, you can do Kanban, fantastic. If you want to do a mixture of the two, fantastic. Do whatever you need to do. Do what your team needs to do to get the job done. We talked about mastery in terms of hiring brilliant people and that sense of purpose. Many of the people need a motivation, and that's different to the paycheck. Yeah? When you're working for an organization like the Ministry of Justice, people are there because they want to help people to engage and get access to justice. So that sense of purpose, what is it your organization is here to do? Why do people get out of bed in the morning to come and work with you? Is the kind of thing that we're trying to instill in the people we brought to work with us. And empowerment means trust. Again, Colin was talking about this earlier on, but that idea of the generals trusting the squads to do the right thing, to take the objective in the same way. And this was a really difficult culture change for the Ministry of Justice, and it's not something we've achieved 100% yet by any means. It's something that's still ongoing. That trust to say, we accept that you know what you're doing, we trust you to meet the objective, go away and do it, and we won't interfere. That's one of the hardest things for an organization to do. It's giving up control from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. So there are no shortcuts to this one. This is something that will take many years, even in the Ministry of Justice, to do, but it's something we're working on and something that will continue to happen. Okay, culture is really, really important. For us, every time we needed to celebrate something, we'd celebrate with cake. And it was the way we worked. We also probably went through more post-it notes than any other organization that you'd see in the area. But that was the way we needed to work. We worked very visually. So culture, making sure that people want to work and have a desire to work with you is really important. And it's very easy to break that when you start to take away things like autonomy and a sense of purpose from people. Okay, so you need to transform from the top down. You need to instill this desire to empower the people lower down the organization. And there's a chap called Tom Loosemore who says the reason why, one of the ways you can earn trust from organizations is to show what you've done, to demonstrate the kind of thing they can get. So at Mind the Product, he spoke a couple of years ago. He said that government ministers should look at the alpha, the prototype, the rough prototype, and be impressed enough to say, I want one of those. And then that's the kind of way of earning the trust to do a bigger experiment, to do a bigger thing. It's also important to build up a track record. So you've got two ways of kind of approaching how you deliver things. You could bet it all on one really, really big product launch and hope that it all goes well. Or you could do lots of really small product launches or releases that allow you to demonstrate a track record of success with much lower risk launches. If you go for that latter option, the low risk approach, you can build up that track record of success. And it means that it's much easier for people to give you permission to do the next thing thereafter. And so what we do is we show things to people. So this lady here in red is Ursula Brennan. She's the permanent secretary for the Ministry of Justice. So she is essentially the boss. She is the most senior person within the Ministry of Justice. And her most senior civil servant in the Ministry of Justice. And her job is essentially to make sure that everything within the Ministry of Justice is coordinated and working well. So we made sure that even the prototypes, the things that were rough and ready, that weren't quite finished yet, we were showing them to her when we got the opportunity, so we could build up that trust of delivery. But it's also important to change from the bottom up. We made sure we had an outreach program where we would train and encourage people to think in a different way, in a more customer-centric way, a more user-centric way. And that meant our 150 people going out to the other 70,000 people in the Ministry of Justice and teaching them about why it was so important to put the citizens first, to put the users first in this. The fourth aspect of this is show, don't tell. And it's kind of intertwined with all the things we've been talking about. One of the reasons why it's important to show rather than tell is because we learn from our peers. Okay? What happens is when people see something happening that's of benefit to them, we'll copy it. There's a gentleman called Alex Pentland, who's a professor at MIT. And he says if you see lots of people experimenting with an idea, people with whom you have strong social ties, there's a high likelihood you'll adopt that behavior. And because he's a data scientist, he has the stats to prove this. So he did experiments on Facebook with 60 million people to demonstrate how you could influence whether people chose to vote in a national election or not. And so he shows that if you, your peers, the people within your organization, if you are seen to be doing something that is of benefit to you, your peers will copy your behavior because it's going to be of benefit to them as well. There's also a lady called Lisa Reichelt. She was the head of research at the Government Digital Service in the UK. Now she's gone over to do the same job in Australia at the Digital Transformation Office. And she very much encouraged this idea of show, don't tell, because they really value talking about what they were going to do, not valuing talking about what showing what they've done rather than talking about what they're going to do. So here's us. This is my team at the Ministry of Justice, showing what they've learned. So we've just done a discovery exercise. We've learned some things from the kinds of people that we're going to be working with. In this case, this is looking at the criminal justice system. And so what we're doing here is we're showing what we've learned. We take 30 minutes a week, every Thursday at 3 p.m. We take 30 minutes, we have a few slots, 5 minutes to show something we've learned that will be of value to the people we work with. And then we take some questions. And we have 3 or 4 of those 5-minute slots each week, and everyone can come along. And it's not just from our team, it could be from anyone. It's an open invitation. Anyone in the Ministry of Justice could turn up to these show and tells. Okay? So that's what we made sure we did, to show what we were learning, to show what we were building. And it could be a technical thing, it could be something we learned from the market, it could be whatever. But the point being is always an opportunity to show and be transparent. And so here's one of the things that we actually pulled out. This is the results of discovery. And this is a user journey map from potentially preventing a crime to then what happens to people after the crime has occurred. There's also the piece about sitting together. So we talked about co-location. Again, there's lots of great research that talks about the power of generating ideas by making people sit together and actually talking to each other. You know, as they were saying, take the earphones out. You know, actually talk to each other. But it worked not just for the teams that we're building the products with, but also with our stakeholders. Okay? So it's really, really important for that collaboration. If you're sitting together on the same side of the desk, you're talking about the same thing, you're understanding the same context, the same problems, and you're ultimately moving towards the same goals, then obviously you'll be much more likely to achieve a good product at the end. So here's the kind of things we do. This is Kelly, one of our researchers, going off to the courts to go and see how people fill in a particular form. And we don't want to necessarily build a better paper form, but by understanding the problems that people were having with the existing forms, we could then make a better digital service. And then all of our outputs we write up, and hence we use all the post-its in London. We put them on the wall. Everything we learn we put up there. So here on the left we've got one of the columns with all of our user personas, and these are real people. And over on the right here, we've got some user stories that we're building up as we learn new things. Okay, last point, improving continuously. We talked about the prison service earlier on, so I wanted to show you kind of what we actually built from that. And what we've got are the 3 kind of snapshots as we go through the process. Here's one of alpha, very early on. Okay, quite early mock-up, doesn't really do anything, but it looks nice. We've got the beta where we're starting to really solidify and maybe experiment with a couple of ideas. And then over on the right here, we've got the final version, the thing that went live. But all of these 3 versions were put in front of people to check whether we're on the right track. And we learned different things. We learned that the text needed to be made more easy to understand, needed to be shorter and more bulleted to make it easier to understand. we tried this kind of workflow piece to see if that would help people understand where they were in the process. But then we actually removed it again in the live version because we found it wasn't helping. We played around with different ways of capturing the date of birth, and we found that actually in the final version, having a free text field for our particular users happened to be a better way of doing it. And even the name we A/B tested. We looked at ways of making sure that the name of the service reflected what people were actually searching for. So we changed it from prison visits booking to visit someone in prison, because that's what people were actually trying to do. So as we're going along, we were continually learning, continually iterating. The last piece of what we did was, how do we improve not just our products, but our processes? So we had regular retrospectives, both within the individual agile teams, but also within the broader team organization. So we'd have these regular retrospectives where the whole 160, 150 people of us would get together and figure out how can we as a department work better. So, to summarize, put user needs first. They are, after all, the people who are going to be using your products. So you need to understand what their problems are and how best you can solve them. 2, you need to build an empowered team, and that comes from recruiting brilliant people of the right skill sets and giving them the autonomy to do the right thing. You need to transform from the top down. You need to change the way the organization thinks and works by earning that trust to allow the teams to have that autonomy they need to do their job right. The 4th thing is show, don't tell. Show the thing you've delivered, don't talk about the thing you're going to build. And the 5th one is improve continuously, both your product and your processes internally. So, all of you, here is your mission. Go out there, build digital services and digital products that are so good, people will prefer to use them. Thank you very much.
Perfect. I'm sure there are many questions. I want to give like time for 1 or 2 questions. Please go ahead, raise your hand.
You were talking about show, don't tell.
Yes.
But I'm sure you had a lot of problems with people within a company that were asking for your future plans. How did you react to that?
Yes, that's a very good question. So one of the things we had was a very open, transparent roadmap. In one of our kind of seating areas, we had these big kind of screens. And so we had about a 6 foot, 8 foot high wall on which we had our roadmap. And so we tried to be as open and transparent about what was happening and what was going on. We also had kind of stand-ups each week to make sure the roadmap itself was updated. But essentially, when people were asking what's coming up, you know, when is this going to be delivered, when is this going to be delivered? If it was within a particular product, we could say, come along to the stand-ups with the team, and they'll show you what's coming up because you'll see what's on the backlog, you'll see what the team's working on today and for the rest of the week, and you can ask questions if you need to. If you're talking more in terms of what the department is doing, then we'd look at the roadmap. And the roadmap would have 3 areas. What we're doing right now, we're pretty sure about, because we're doing it right now. What we're going to be doing next, again, we're pretty sure what the next thing was going to be. And everything else, what's coming later. And that could be a whole bunch of stuff that may or may not happen in different orders.
Super, we're out of time. I'm sure there's lots of opportunities to catch up with Jock. Jock, thank you very much.